Hey everybody. In today's video, we're gonna talk about how to process data that comes back from your web services into a sort of decent looking user interface. So in the last lab, you guys had to write a web service that would display the contents of a cars table in JSON format, right? So you had to do something like this. Your data would probably be different because that's my license plate number, but fundamentally it's the same sort of thing. You have a PHP file that's displaying a JSON array containing JSON objects which correspond to rows in your database. What you then did is just displayed this in a text view. What we're going to do today is something a little more complex. Okay, so I'm going to use the Android alternative for this. Although if you do this in actual Android, it shouldn't be particularly different. So if you're using the Android alternative, you'll see that this is what your activity looks like. You've got this onCreate method, and at the moment there's pretty much nothing in it. I've created a blank linear layout, set its orientation to vertical, and set that to be the content view. Okay, so there's nothing actually in the linear layout. Okay, and so if you look at the web browser, all we've got is a back button because there's nothing else in the app. So the first thing we're going to do is change that. We're going to make a text view. This text view is not really for anything. I'm just making it for testing purposes, really. And we're going to set its value to, I don't know, stuff, just to see that it shows up on the screen, right? So then we're going to add it to our content view. And similarly, we're going to make a button, and the button is going to be what we're going to use to make stuff happen. Okay, so when I click run, I'm going to want to do whatever this app is supposed to do. Okay, so if I do that, then the server is going to reload, and I've now got this text view and I've got the run button. Now, if you're in actual Android, you probably have to click a play button to either hot swap or deploy the app to the emulator. Okay, in the Android alternative, it just loads on the side there, so it's not a big deal. But at the moment, this button does absolutely nothing. I click on run, nothing happens. Okay, if I want something to happen, I have to create an onClick listener. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say b.set onClick listener new view dot onClick list. So this is similar to how you said Android :onClick in your calculator lab to set an onClick listener, right? But this is doing it in Java rather than in XML. You can use this exact code on Android and it'll work fine. Okay, so what do we want to do when we click on the button? Maybe for now we're just going to say something like t.setText to clicked or something, just to show us that a click happened, right? That's supposed to be a dot. Okay, so when we load the page now, we have to give it some time to load, but once it loads, it's there. And we click run, you'll see that it used to say stuff and now it says clicked. Okay, so that worked fine. But what do I actually want to do? Well, I really want to download this PHP file so that I can use its values to create a user interface, right? So nobody can legitimately remember how to do that. So I'm going to go to this page on creating, on doing HTTP requests with OKHTTP. And I'm going to just copy code from there. So first I need to create my OKHTTP client. Now I'm going to do all this in the onClick listener because I don't want any of this to happen randomly. I want it to happen when I click on the button. I'm going to change the URL to the one that corresponds to my web service. And that means I'm going to be able to get the value from that web service, right? Then I've got to decide, do I want to do a synchronous or asynchronous network call? Now in Android, you can only really do asynchronous network calls. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just pasting the code from there onto that. Wait. Although let me undo that, because actually what I'm going to want to do is do an asynchronous call that updates a view that's in the network, that's in the main thread. So I'm going to copy this code. Okay, that's a pretty important skill for a programmer to have, is figuring out which code to copy. And then Eclipse is going to tell me there's an error because this thing has to implement an on failure. Okay, so I mean, no problem. I'll just tell it, hey, implement it, you know. It's fine. I don't really care what it does on the failure. So there's a failure message now, and I mean a on failure method, and the method that came from this OKHTTP example was creating a text view and setting its value to what comes back from the response. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my existing text view, which was called T, and I'm going to set its text to the value of the response body, right? So maybe I'll just say string JSON equals response dot body dot string. Okay, that gets the response body, and then I set the text to be from the response body. Okay, the pasted code seems to have an error here because there's a missing bracket. And okay, done. So when I go here, I then can click run, and hopefully it will change the value of the text. Now, since it didn't, I'm going to go look for what the error is. So it says illegal state exception closed. Okay, so what's happening is that I already read the response data as the string response data, so I can't read it again because once I read the body, it closes. Okay, so I'm just going to say string JSON equals response data because I already read it. I basically can't read it twice. What it says then is there's no possibility of an exception happening, so I can take out that try catch and wait for this thing to reload, and when I click run, you'll see now it's displaying the values from the PHP file. Okay, so far so good. You've probably all done pretty much all of this before. What I want to do now is I want to process that JSON, right? So I'm going to make a method called process JSON. I could, in theory, do it in this run method, but it just gets messy. Like, it gets hard to follow where everything is. If I put it in like a process JSON, then I know, you know, that's where the JSON is going to get processed. So I'll say instead of doing what I did there, I'm going to process JSON with the response data as the data that gets processed. Now, when I process the JSON, I need to have some idea of what the JSON string looks like. So one important thing is I can see that the initial string is a JSON array because it's got square brackets, and inside it I've got JSON objects. So I can just create a JSON array. Okay, if you need to import stuff, you can just press Ctrl-Shift-O if you're in Eclipse. In Android Studio, you have to press Alt-Enter when positioned on the thing that's not imported, and it'll import for you. Now I'm going to loop over all the items in the JSON array. Okay, and the question then is, what do I want to do with each of these items? Okay, so maybe a fairly straightforward thing is I could create a text view with just the license plate numbers and show that on the screen. Okay, so let's try that. So we're going to say JSON object, because remember in the array we've got JSON objects. So JSON object JO equals JA.getI, meaning go get me the ith JSON object from that JSON array. Okay, so then I can maybe say string license equals jo.getString. What did I call the field? Okay, I called it number. So number, and then maybe I'll say text view t equals new text view this, and t.set text to license. Okay, now I want to add that text view to my main layout so that I can actually have stuff appear, right? But at some point I'm going to want to remove those text views as well if I click the button again, you know what I mean? So what I'm going to do is, instead of adding them to this content linear layout, I'm going to create a new linear layout. Let's call it linear layout. Let's call it container. equals new linear layout. And we're going to add that to our content layout container. Okay. Now, the thing is, this process JSON is going to need a reference to that linear layout. So the easiest way to accomplish this is to make a global variable called container, and then say container equals new linear layout instead of linear layout container, meaning I'm not creating a new reference. I'm using this reference and setting it to the new linear layout. But the advantage of this is that this container doesn't belong to the onCreate method. It belongs to the activity. So that means that over here I can say container.addView T, and it will add that text view to the container. So let's try that out. So I click run. So you can see now I've got all three of my numbers there. But what if I want to make a more complex layout? So if you're using Android, you can create a new XML file in the layouts folder and play around with that sort of structure. But in the Android alternative and in Android itself, you can just create a new class. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say new class, and this class is going to be the layout that I want to use for the items that come back, right? So I'm going to call it maybe car layout. And what this is going to be is it's going to be a layout that's going to show the information from an individual car in a sort of nicer layout, right? So I'm going to say extends linear layout, and Eclipse is going to tell me you have to import linear layout for one thing, and you have to create a constructor. So I'm going to do that. Okay. Then what do I actually want this layout to do? Well, maybe, okay, looking at the information that's coming back, I get an ID, an owner, a brand, a number. So maybe what I want to display on the screen is, maybe on the left, I want to display the license plate number. And then on the right, I'm going to display the brand and the owner. I don't know. It doesn't really matter, right? This is just an example, but let's try it out. So what I know is I want to create these text views for the various items. So maybe the first thing I'm going to show on the left is the license plate number, right? So I'm going to say text view number equals new text view P. So I can't say this anymore, but because the constructor has a link to the linear layout, I can send that in, right? Maybe I make another text view for the owner, and another one for the brand. Let's try that. Brand equals new text view P. Okay. Then I want to lay them out in a particular way. So like I say, I want to put the license plate number on the left, and then on the right, so sort of similar to where it is, and then on the right I want to show the brand and the owner. Okay, so that means I want a horizontal linear layout so that these two things can be next to each other. So I'm going to make a new, let me set this one to be horizontal actually. So I'm going to set the orientation of this thing to be horizontal. So now when I put things on it, they're going to be next to each other, right? So then I can add the number to the linear layout. But the thing on the right, I want the brand and the owner to be vertically oriented. Like I want to show the owner and then the brand, like, you know, one under the other. So I'm going to say linear layout, right layout equals new linear layout, and this is going to give me a layout that I can use on the right hand side of the screen, and it's going to have a vertical orientation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the owner, no, maybe the brand first, and then the owner to that linear layout, and then I'm going to add that linear layout to the main linear layout. So add view right layout. Okay, Now, that means in here, when I am processing my JSON objects, remember that each JSON object actually refers to a particular car. So instead of doing all of that, I'm going to say car layout CL equals new car layout, because for each car, I want to use one of those car layouts. Not P this. Okay. Then I can say container.addView CL. Okay, so now my car layouts will be added here. But I don't yet have a way of filling in the content of the car layout, you know, so what I want to do is I want to make a function here called populate. Wow. Populate. And maybe I want to populate from a JSON object, because I already have a JSON object on this side. You see, I've got the JSON object. So if you can hear all of that stuff going on with flutes and things in the background, that's my son. He's playing music in the background. And it's good to have some ambient music in the lecture video, so I should thank him afterwards. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to set the value of the text view number. I'm saying number.setText to be the item from the JSON object, right? So I can jo.getString, and the key, if I look here, is number. Okay, so I can say number. Now the problem with this is that the text view is only available inside the constructor. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to say text view number, and since I'm going to need the owner and the brand as well, I'm going to just make those global as well. So number.setText number, and then I want to set the brand and the owner as well. So brand owner brand owner. Okay, so here I shouldn't be creating new text views. I should use the ones that correspond to the field. Okay, but this is cool now because car layout has a way of populating from a JSON object. So over here I can say cl.populate, because I just created that method, and I can feed it jo, which is the JSON object corresponding to the current car. Okay, so that was a fair amount of code that I wrote without testing, so that's okay. But so you can see what's happened is now on the left we've got the license plate number, and on the right we've got the brand and the owner, which is great. That's exactly what we wanted. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Now let's say I don't want each of these to use half the screen. Like I'd actually like to push this along as far as it can go instead of using half the screen. Now what I can do there is I can change the layout parameters so that this right layout ends up using more of the space. Okay, so let's see what happens there. So first thing is that when I add the view here for the number, I want to tell it that actually it shouldn't use as much of the screen. And how I do that is by saying linear layout dot layout params LP equals new linear layout dot layout params. And now I have to decide what I want to do with the values. So I'm going to say linear layout dot layout params dot, first one is going to be wrap content, because I want the height to be equal to the, I mean I want the width to be as big as it needs to be to contain the values. So I'm going to do the same thing, linear layout dot layout params dot wrap content. So basically what that does is it sets the size of the layout to be as big as it needs to be. So when I add this text view, the amount of space it's going to take up is fundamentally however much space it needs. That's what wrap content means. If I change it to match parent, that means use up all the space. So if I set its width to match parent, for instance, it would fill that text view would fill the entire horizontal space. Okay, so I don't really want to do that, but yeah, I could. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set its weight, weight equal to 0, meaning it shouldn't really expand. It should have a fixed weight. Okay. When I add the right layout, I'm going to do the same sort of thing. Okay, I can't use the name LP because it's already used. So I'm going to say LP2, and I'm going to set this one's weight to 1, meaning that anytime there's extra space left over, the second layout should grab it. Okay, so if I click run now, okay, to reload, you'll see that now it's pushed as far in this way as it can, because the right layout is using up all the available extra space. Okay, but this looks kind of stupid, like it's just too tightly stuck together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some padding so that there'll be some white space. And I want to add the padding on the number view. So I'm going to say number.set padding and give it some sort of number, maybe, I don't know, let's say 20, I don't know. You always do this stuff by trial and error. Okay, after it reloads, you can see there's now some padding assigned to these things, and you can play around with these layouts and make them look however you want them to look. One thing I'm going to show you guys is it's kind of annoying that these things don't have a boundary between them, right? So one cool way to give them a boundary is to make every second one a different color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, every second one would happen when I mod 2 is equal to 0. So if I mod 2 equals 0. So what that's going to do is going to say if the counter is divisible by 2, then do the stuff that's in this line. And I could always put an else that says do something else if it's not, right? But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, let's set the background color of CL. So CL.set background color. And that takes in a color object. So I'm going to say color.parseColor and give it a color. Now, how this works is it takes in the red, green, and blue components as hex strings. So if I say the white is FF, meaning max out the red, green, and blue components, right? But I don't want it to be white. I want it to be slightly bluish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down the red and green ones. So we get like EE, FF. So we've got slightly more blue than we've got red and green in our color. And it's going to reload. And when we run it now, we'll see there's like a blue tint to every second one. Okay, which is kind of cool. The next thing I want to show you guys is that I can set click listeners on these list items, right? So maybe I want to say cl.set on click listener. So now that's going to happen when I click on the car layout. So maybe, what do I want to happen? Maybe I'll just print out the age of the car. I think I've got the age of the car. Yeah, so the age of the car here is 20. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say toast.makeText this, comma, okay, maybe I have to say main activity.this, comma, this car is, and then maybe plus jo.getString age, years old, and then comma toast.length long.show. Okay, all of this code should work fine in Android. I haven't tested it though, so if it doesn't, please let me know on the WhatsApp group and we'll figure it out. But so now when I run it, it looks the same, but if I click on it, you can see it says this car is 25 years old. If I click on this one, it says this car is 12 years old. This car is 20 years old. Okay, so the point is I was able to do interactive things with the layout, you know, without any major effort. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to show you guys today. I think it's quite a cool structure, and you can sort of see that you'll be using stuff like this a lot in your code. For instance, you could say, like, when you click on this, you want to go to the profile page for that car. And then basically here you'll have an intent, and you'll use that intent to get to the next page. I haven't shown you guys intents, but that's what the next video is going to be about. Okay, thank you everybody.